The moment Liam Neeson looked straight into a live television camera and said he had never met Meghan Markle, something didn't just feel off, it detonated a contradiction so loud it echoed across every polished narrative built around her name. Because this wasn't a vague memory slip. This wasn't confusion. This was a clean, absolute denial against a photograph that refuses to disappear. In late 2025, the statement landed with surgical precision: never met, never introduced, never crossed paths. Final, closed, untouchable. But reality doesn't bend that easily. Reality leaves traces. And this one left a frozen moment in time. Meghan Markle and Liam Neeson side by side, smiling into the camera at a Hillary Clinton fundraiser, standing close enough to erase any possibility of coincidence. Same room, same frame, same moment. And yet, months later, denial. Why? That question doesn't just sit there quietly. It claws. It demands. Because people don't deny documented reality without a reason, especially not someone like Liam Neeson, a man whose public identity rests on being direct, grounded, almost brutally honest. So what was worth risking that reputation? What thread was so dangerous that it had to be cut before anyone started pulling? Stay inside that question. Don't let it go. Because weeks after that denial, something slipped. January 2026. A different interview. A different tone. The conversation drifted casually, almost lazily, into familiar territory Hollywood Irish connections. The fundraising circuit. And then, without warning, the contradiction exploded. Liam Neeson didn't just acknowledge the same world he had denied he described it. Vividly, specifically, he remembered Meghan Markle. He remembered the parties. And then he used one word that changed everything. Clung, not attended, not accompanied. Clung, pause there. Let that word breathe. Because it carries weight, visible dependence, proximity that draws attention, a dynamic that doesn't hide, a person attached, not just present. And suddenly, the denial from weeks earlier doesn't look like a mistake. It looks like strategy. A calculated attempt to erase a connection that, once spoken out loud, reveals something far bigger than a casual meeting. So now we're looking at two versions of reality. One where Liam Neeson never met Meghan Markle, and another where he watched her closely enough to describe her behavior in detail at exclusive events. That's not a gap, that's a fracture. And fractures don't appear without pressure, because behind that single contradiction lies an entire world most people never see: the closed-door ecosystem of private fundraisers, elite guest lists, and invisible gatekeepers. The photograph wasn't taken on a crowded red carpet. It was captured inside a Hillary Clinton fundraiser hosted by John Fitzpatrick at his own Manhattan hotel. That detail matters more than it seems. This wasn't a public event. This was a controlled room. Invitations weren't handed out, they were chosen carefully, and Meghan Markle was there, standing beside Liam Neeson, wearing a bright pink dress, composed, confident, smiling like she belonged. Not an outsider slipping through unnoticed. Not someone lost in the crowd. Someone placed. Positioned included, so the real question shifts. It's no longer did they meet? That's already answered. The photograph settled that. The real question becomes, who put Meghan Markle in that room? And the answer, quietly but unmistakably, points to John Fitzpatrick, a name that doesn't scream celebrity but moves with something far more powerful: access, influence, control over who enters spaces where power quietly reshapes itself. His Manhattan hotels weren't just buildings, they were filters, gateways, places where politicians, donors, actors, and insiders merged into a single orbit. And Fitzpatrick wasn't just hosting it, he was orchestrating it, which means every person inside those rooms wasn't just there by chance. They were there because someone opened the door. And Meghan Markle didn't just walk in. She appeared repeatedly, event after event, gathering proximity, building familiarity, becoming part of a pattern. And that pattern is exactly what Liam Neeson accidentally confirmed. Because when he said she showed up everywhere, clung to Fitzpatrick, stayed close, he wasn't describing a single night. He was describing repetition, visibility, a presence that became known enough to be remembered long after the moment passed. So now the denial looks different. It doesn't look like forgetfulness. It looks like avoidance. Because something about that connection, those rooms, those introductions, those early associations, collides directly with the story that came later. The carefully constructed image. The narrative of independence, of rising alone, of carving a path without assistance. But photographs don't cooperate with narratives, they just exist. And this one does more than exist, it connects dots. It shows Meghan Markle inside a network that doesn't open itself to outsiders without reason. It places her beside Liam Neeson in a setting too controlled to dismiss. And it forces a question that doesn't fade easily: how did she get there? Because once you start asking that, everything shifts. The parties aren't just parties anymore, they're entry points. The introduction interactions aren't casual, they're strategic, the presence isn't accidental, it's facilitated, and suddenly Liam Neeson's contradiction doesn't feel random. It feels like a reaction. A quick calculation made in public: deny first, distance immediately. Avoid being pulled into a story that's far more complicated than it appears on the surface. But then something slipped. A memory, a detail, a word. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was calculated, stretched thin over a story that suddenly felt too fragile to touch. Because once Liam Neeson said it, once that word clung, landed, and settled into public memory, everything that came before it began to rearrange itself into something sharper, something harder to ignore. The denial no longer stood alone. It now had a shadow, and that shadow was filled with detail, with recollection, with a version of events that refused to stay buried. And this is where the tension deepens, because contradictions don't just expose a single moment, they expose patterns. A denial followed by a vivid memory is not a mistake. It's a fracture in narrative control. It suggests that the first instinct was distance, but the second instinct, the unguarded one, was truth slipping through before it could be contained. And when that happens in public, it doesn't just raise questions about Liam Neeson, it redirects attention straight toward Meghan Markle and the world surrounding Meghan Markle long before Prince Harry ever entered the frame. Because the photograph was never just a photograph. It was a receipt, a quiet, undeniable record that Meghan Markle existed inside a network that most people never gain access to, standing shoulder to shoulder with figures like Liam Neeson in spaces controlled by names like John Fitzpatrick. That matters because those spaces are not neutral. They are curated. Every person inside them represents a decision, and Meghan Markle appearing repeatedly within that orbit begins to look less like coincidence and more like placement. So when Liam Neeson tried to erase that connection, it wasn't just about avoiding a casual association. It was about avoiding the implications behind it, because acknowledging that moment means acknowledging the system that made it possible. A system built on invitations, on introductions, on relationships that operate quietly but decisively in the background. And once that system becomes visible, the narrative surrounding Meghan Markle begins to shift in ways that are difficult to control. Because the story that followed after Prince Harry, after Buckingham Palace, after the global spotlight depends on something very specific. It depends on the idea that Meghan Markle arrived through her own momentum, her own effort, her own path. But the earlier chapter, the one Liam Neeson accidentally illuminated, suggests something far more layered. It suggests that doors were opened long before the world was watching, that proximity to power was not a sudden transformation, but a gradual accumulation, built through repeated access to rooms that reshape the people inside them. And once that idea takes hold, it changes how every moment is interpreted. The photograph stops being a simple image and becomes a starting point. The fundraiser stops being an event and becomes an entry. The contradiction stops being a slip and becomes a signal. Because if Liam Neeson felt the need to deny something so easily provable, then the real story isn't the meeting, it's the reason the meeting needed to be denied at all. That's where the tension tightens. Because the answer doesn't sit comfortably on the surface. It sits in the gap between what is shown and what is said. The gap between the documented past and the controlled narrative that followed. And gaps like that don't stay quiet forever. They attract attention. They pull in scrutiny. They widen with every resurfaced detail, every remembered moment, every fragment that refuses to align perfectly with the story being presented. And here is where everything begins to feel unfinished, unresolved, still moving beneath the surface. Because nothing in this sequence actually closes. The photograph still exists. The contradiction still stands. The memory Liam Neeson shared cannot be unspoken. And the silence that followed from Meghan Markle does not erase any of it, it amplifies it. Because silence in a story this visible is never neutral. It becomes part of the pattern. Another piece of the puzzle that doesn't explain itself but demands to be noticed. And now the situation sits exactly where stories like this always end up on the edge of something larger. Not proven, not fully denied, but suspended in a space where questions carry more weight than answers. Because once a narrative begins to crack, even slightly, it doesn't return to what it was. It shifts permanently, and somewhere inside that shift, one reality refuses to fade. Liam Neeson didn't just contradict himself. Liam Neeson pointed, however briefly, toward a version of Meghan Markle's past that doesn't fit neatly into the story the world was told. A version built on rooms, on access, on proximity that came from somewhere, someone, something that cannot be easily explained away. And the most unsettling part isn't what's already been seen. It's what still hasn't been uncovered.